Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. And my name is Fredrik, and today we will talk about SAFe and DevOps and agility. And let's just go through the basics very quickly first. So there are many definitions to DevOps. I like the definition they have in the DevOps handbook, which is about the 3 ways. You need to have flow in order to move work as fast as possible through the value chain. As we move things through the value chains, there will be constraints and blockers. So we want to have instant feedback, and we want to do something about the feedback in order to improve. And that's the way we learn continuously to become better and have better flow. We combine this with the value stream, and the value stream then is how do you take something from start to finish as fast, what are the necessary steps that we need to take, often from a customer-centric perspective then. The theory of constraint is about finding the current worst constraint, removing it like a bottleneck, and as we remove the bottlenecks, we'll get better flow throughout the value process. System theory, that is about in a complex system where there seems to be no causality, where actually doing the same thing twice might give different results. We need to understand the whole system and its subsystems in order to understand how they affect each other. And from that, we can then take action. Now, SAFe is a large framework introducing lots of concepts. You have Lean, you have DevOps, you have Scrum, you have much more in this huge framework. And the intention of this framework is to make large companies more agile and lean. And then we might ask ourselves, why do they want to become more agile and lean? Well, they don't want to end up like the dinosaurs. We have from time to time seen how small, nimble companies using disruptive technology can overtake the market. And of course, the big dinosaur companies do not wish for that to happen. So SAFe then has the ambition to make these dinosaur companies a little bit more agile and lean. Now the question is then, if you follow the recipe, will it actually work? Is SAFe really the promised land of lean and agile? After all, I believe that following a recipe with ingredients, you need to understand the ingredients. If you're making an apple cake, for example, you need to understand how to tell a bad apple from a good apple, or the recipe might not be very tasty. So I always think that you need to change the recipe to fit your own organization's culture and context and current situation. Now, in this session, we will examine SAFe from a DevOps perspective, but we'll also look a little bit into the Cynefin model created by Dave Snowden. And we'll look at the complex and the complicated domains. Now, in the complex domain, there is no causality, no cause and effect, not what we can discover in any way. So you cannot anticipate what will happen. Again, doing the same thing twice might give you different results. I usually say that no software design survives the first contact with a user. And usually the way it goes is that we ask the users what they want to have. Then we give the users what they told us they wanted. And then they tell us, no, that's not what I want anymore. So yeah, users. So in order to then get a good product, we need to iterate, we need to do a probe, sense, respond. That is, we try some things, then we sense what is the right approach, and then we respond to the new knowledge that we have. Sounds a little bit like DevOps. Now, in the complicated domain, we have causality, cause and effect, but it might be difficult to understand. So you need some experts together who have seen a similar complicated problem before. And then you do analysis, and based on the analysis, you can make a plan, and then you can execute on the plan, that is, respond on the plan. So if you just know and have the expertise, you can make a step-by-step plan and you can follow it, and then you can solve the problem. Why is this then important? Well, depending on the problem you're trying to solve, you need to use different approaches. Otherwise, it might be like using a screwdriver to hammer down a nail in some sense. So let me just give a quick example of how we can combine this. Imagine the manager, John. He has way too many Barbie t-shirts he needs to sell. So he has sold them to his father, he has sold them to himself, but still he has not sold enough t-shirts. So he approaches his team and tells them, I need to sell many, many more t-shirts. Do you have an idea of what we can do? So the team, they sit down, they think for a little while, and then they say, well, let's try 3 different approaches. Let's put a big banner for one customer segment on our page. For another segment, let's have a discount of 25%. And for a third segment, let's have a discount of 50%. Great, says John. So do the changes and we'll try it out. So the teams, they make some changes, they run it through the CD pipeline, and woohoo, it's out in production. And when it's out in production, they put up some metrics to see what the differences are. And let's pretend from that they notice that putting an ad makes no difference. Having a discount of 25% increases sales by 20%, but so does a discount of 50%, meaning that they sense that the best solution is the 20% discount. So John asks the team to roll out the 20% discount to the entire population, and they press the CD pipeline again, and whoops, it's out in production. So here we could see we had a flow throughout the process. There was nothing blocking us. We had instant feedback almost in real time, and we acted up on the feedback, and we learned something from this feedback. Now, before we move on here, let me just put in a quick disclaimer. What I'm going to tell a story about now is our experiences using SAFe for the last 3 years. And quite a big SAFe implementation, having about 1,500 people involved. And I'm sure there will be a SAFe expert in this room or somewhere else saying that this is not how you're supposed to run SAFe, or this is not what SAFe tells you to do. And I'm absolutely sure that person is correct, but these are my experiences, these are the failures that we have done, and my purpose is to share our failures, and hopefully that can help someone else to not make the same failures. We have done a lot of failures, and we can't really bring all of them up, so we'll focus on one central part of SAFe, which is the PI planning. Now, this is John, and we will follow his journey, but let me just get into a little bit of a storytelling mode. I like hats, and that makes me take a different role. This is the hat I use when I tell stories to my kids. It just makes me look a little bit funny as well. So, this is John. John was excited to start a new job. He had worked with previously worked with lots of methodologies and different frameworks, but he had never worked with SAFe. He was employed at a new company, a large company that had begun to use SAFe just recently. He already had an invitation to participate in the first PI planning. He had received an agenda for the next 2 days with a plan of what to do at which stage. So on the next, oh, that's the wrong. Sorry about that. So, by the way, if you wonder about the pictures, I let an AI generate them. This is how I described a PI planning, and this is what the AI came up with. So, not my picture, not my fault. Anyway, John came into a big room. There was 100 people in the room. It was a buzz of activities. Teams were sitting around tables with post-its and Kanban notes. On the walls, there were lots of flip charts and more. And along one big wall, there was a program board containing all the user stories and all the features and a lot of red yarn marking dependencies between all of these stories. An release train engineer enters the scene. A release train engineer is kind of a scrum master for scrum masters and welcomes everybody and invites the business owners and the product managers to the stage to tell all the different teams what is the most important features to work on for the next 3 months. After doing so, the teams get about 4 hours or so to analyze, break down the features, plan their capacity, and to commit what they can deliver at what sprint. Now, John was watching this and he was thinking, it seems like we're following established procedures. It seems like we assume that the outcome is predictable and controllable, that the teams can commit to what they can deliver if they just analyze and plan enough. A great concept for solving complicated problems. But in fact, on the team level, they will be using DevOps. They will be using Scrum. These are frameworks created for solving complex problems. Now, after completing the PI planning, all the teams were excited to reap the benefits of this great planning for the next 3 months, synchronizing all the work across the teams. However, as time went by, John started to notice some drawbacks to the approach. The teams were very heavily focused on output, on what to deliver. They were committed to delivering specific user stories within predetermined sprints. After a few days, a stakeholder approached John and said, "We have a new urgent request that needs to be done. The teams have to take it on. It's very important." So John went to some of the teams and said, "We have a new urgent request. We need to deliver." The teams looked at him like he was crazy and said, "No, we cannot take on anything more. We committed to the plan. We promised the stakeholders what we would deliver. And now you're telling us to do something else. No, we're not going to do it." All right, John thought, I'll better talk to the product managers. So he went up to the product managers and said, "We have a new urgent request." And the product managers looked at him like he was crazy and said, "No, that's going to be messy. We've taken all the feedback from all the teams, we put that into a feature roadmap for the next 3 months." They showed John the feature roadmap, which they were very proud of. For John, it kind of looked like a Gantt chart on steroids, but with a lot of red yarn instead of a critical path. In the second sprint, things started to go off the rails. The teams encountered problems in the form of bugs or unexpected, unplanned work, or user stories were not done because the estimates, even though were correct, were not completed. Now, the stakeholders, they got angry because they talked to the teams and they said, "You promised you would deliver to this. You committed to delivering these user stories, these sprints." So the product managers responded by talking to the stakeholders and trying to negotiate another scope or maybe even removing some stories. But John thought there is something very wrong with this. He was thinking of the Agile Manifesto, of individuals and interactions, of work, of customer collaboration and responding to change, instead of following a plan and contract negotiation. I must do some system thinking, John thought. He drew some circles and came up with some small things here. Oh, I can't read this. Well, anyway, he thought, if we focus on the business demands features, then of course our focus would be on the features, and then we value feature delivery on time, and when we value this, then delivery on time is more important than the outcome, which means we'll focus on the output. And that means in the end that we have contract negotiation when we cannot deliver what we promised. For the teams, the focus on features means that we will get the question of when will it be delivered? So then the teams will make some guesstimates. And from these guesstimates, we will create a feature roadmap. And because we have many teams, we need coordination to solve the dependencies. And then in order for not the entire plan to be ruined, we need to commit to delivering specific features at a specific time. And then when that happens, of course, you do not want to have any changes. And you do not wish to respond to any feedback either, which is kind of a critical mindset in both agility and DevOps. So what did John learn here? Well, he learned that the sense, analyze, response structure used implicitly in PI plannings makes the teams focus too much on what to deliver when. The teams have put a lot of effort into their plan. They committed and they promised. And of course, if you have done that, you don't want any change. You want to stick to your plan. John was thinking back of the t-shirt team selling t-shirts and experimenting in real time, getting feedback, acting up on the feedback, and doing changes almost immediately. He thought of it like a little bit like playing chess. The team were making one move, then they waited for the response of the customers, and then they decided the move that they would do. In our case, he thought, it's like we're playing a game of chess, but we are deciding the 20 next moves, and we don't care about what move the others do. So he thought that maybe if we want to respond fast, maybe we should not stick to a plan. To respond fast, we need to be able to respond to change and feedback. So John realized that the important thing here is to shift our focus from what to deliver to what result do we wish to have. For example, he thought, instead of setting a goal that we should deliver a new user functions where users can get discount, maybe we should say we want to increase sales by 20% in 3 months. The big difference in these two approaches to setting a goal is that in the first approach, you assume that you know what features will deliver the expected result. In the second goal, you assume that you do not know what features will give you the expected result, meaning that you can do a more of a probe sense respond if you set a goal based upon the result you wish to have rather than what features you believe will give you the expected result. Some time passed and one of the team members approached John and said, it actually works. We changed our mindset. We can now be more flexible and more responsive. Now, during the PI planning, the teams had been very careful to calculate the capacity. They made sure they filled their backlog to 100%. They wanted to have 100% resource utilization in order to maximize their productivity. But the teams, they soon discovered that, hey, we get a lot of unplanned work happening in the form of bugs, or maybe an influential stakeholder coming with a last-minute urgent request. As the glass was already filled, there was a problem having more into the glass. You had to empty something before you could add more into the glass. So this resulted in some angry product owners and product managers and stakeholders. Because again, the teams had promised they would deliver something, and now they were into contract negotiation again, trying to say, what can we remove in order to add something new? Another problem was they made estimates using a recommendation from the SAFe framework, where 1 story points equals 1 man day of work in order to calculate initial velocity. The problem was that even though a team might have done the right estimate of 5 story points, in reality, it took perhaps 20 days before that user story was in production. It could be because maybe one team started working on the first point, that then they had a dependency for another team to finish the story, which meant that might be a week or even a sprint before they could take over. And then they had to move it into production, and that might take a few days more. So a 5-point story point, or 5-story point user story, might actually take 20 days to get into production. The problem was that the roadmap was based upon the man days estimate, which caused some mayhem. So John realized that just estimating the actual work time is not very efficient. John stumbled upon the Phoenix project, a book, and he realized that filling the backlog is the same thing as having 100% resource utilization. And what happens then? Well, you get queues. As soon as you get above approximately 80% and you get any variation, you will get queues and you will have unplanned work coming in. So he sat down with the teams and asked, what can we do about this? How can we make this better? So they said, why don't we experiment by just filling the first sprint to 70% of our expected capacity, the second sprint to 60% and 50% for the third one, just to indicate the uncertainty as we go further into the future. And John said, well, let's try. It turned out that it worked pretty well. They got better flow because they could actually handle the unplanned work and last-minute request coming in because the glass was not full. In addition, it was less stressful for the teams to work because they don't had to work overtime. They had a more sustainable pace of work. And for the product managers, it meant less contract negotiation because they could also, one more time, handle unplanned work. What about estimates then? John talked to the teams and said, do we really need to make estimates? I mean, if we're setting up a goal based on result where we actually don't know what features will be because we learn as we go along what will be the next feature to build, do we need estimates? The teams did not really agree with him. They said that, no, estimates can be good in the team anyway, because then we can talk about the scope and we can know that we are on the same page. But they all agree that it's not a very good idea to use the story points of velocity for any productivity metrics. The story points should be kept within the team. But then the question came up, how do we then handle the question of when will it be done? John thought, and he said, why don't we try an experiment with cycle times? If we look at, let's say, historically, how long time did it take for our latest 50 user stories from start to end to go into production. And then we remove the extremes. And then we can say that within 80% of the cases, we can complete a user story within X days. The team nodded and said, okay, let's try that. Now, one day, John discovered all the teams standing in front of the big program board, looking at all the red yarn and all the complexity with how to complete features based upon the user stories. Often the teams could not finish their feature because they had to wait for another team to complete their part, which might be in the next sprint in worst case. When defects were found and sent back, the teams had to relearn and rediscover what they had worked on 3 weeks ago. And they had to shift focus all the time. The Scrum Masters told John, we had troubles identifying these inefficiencies, but we stumbled upon Poppendick's 7 ways of software development, which is basically partially done work, extra features, relearning, handoffs, and much more. And they said, why do we just mark the dependencies with red yarn? Why don't we just try to remove the constraints instead? Ah, that's a great idea, said John. Let's do that. As the teams moved on, they discovered that some dependencies are easy to fix, such as automating the pipelines, creating scripts, and other things that were within the team's own control. Other things were very difficult to fix, such as because of the complex structure of the company with regulations and policies, and not to talk about the extremely complicated landscape of products using different technologies and other things. In these cases, they could actually not, as a team themselves, fix these dependencies. So John talked to the Scrum Masters again, and Ted said that, well, the best solution we can come up with is that we automate as much as possible, that we create an architecture that can make the team as independent as possible in order to increase their zone of control. So actually, it's easy for any team to deploy anything. But we also need to educate the product owners about technical depth and why this is so important. And John, you as a manager, you need to create the conditions for this to happen. All right, John said, let's go with that. It had been some time. And John sat down with the teams to understand the SAFe framework. They couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The sheer number of concepts and layers and practices and methods baked into the framework made their heads spin. John exclaimed, just look at this picture. There are so many concepts. It's very complicated. Lean alone, there are hundreds of books written about that. Scrum is only 14 pages, but people debate that endlessly on LinkedIn. And SAFe has some version of Scrum that is called Scrum XP, or now it's called SAFe Scrum, which is not really the same. This is very confusing to me. Each team member tried to understand how it all fit together, but they felt like they were missing the forest for all the trees. They were so focused on following what SAFe told them to do that they forgot the most important question. How can we deliver software faster to users? John thought, it's clear that the creators of SAFe, they have cherry-picked every single cool concept there is and they just add it. It's, it's a consultant's dream and a team's nightmare. It's like they're trying to make the best cake in the world. They add whipped cream because that is nice, strawberries because we like strawberries, and then we discover we need something healthy. So let's add some carrots and spinach and bacon. Everything tastes better with bacon. So let's make this gigantic cake. And they said, yeah, that's right. Safe is like a carrot, chocolate, cream cheese, blueberry, lemon candy crust, frozen meat cake. It's just too much. The teams continued to reflect about what can we do about this. And to start with, they said, why don't we treat SAFe as a toolbox instead? It has a lot of good concepts, but trying to embrace them all into one big framework is just too complicated. And it makes us focus much more on the processes and tools rather than the individuals and the interactions. And we should perhaps not treat SAFe as a truth, having all the answers. We need to modify SAFe to fit our unique company. And finally, they agree that SAFe is very complicated, and we should focus on how to deliver value more often. So, a little bit to summarize here. SAFe introduces a lot of good concepts. The trap is it's so easy to fall into how complicated SAFe is that you start focuses on the processes and tools of SAFe rather than how can we improve all the time. And despite working with Scrum Masters, which are really great, I find us constantly ending up on the right side of the manifesto, where we have contract negotiation, we want to stick to our plan, and we do not want to respond to the changes very much. And while SAFe can help to prioritize big initiatives across companies to align everyone to work together towards a big product or an initiative or something else, the implicit sense, analyze, respond make us focus a lot on the output instead, which doesn't go very well with Scrum or DevOps, which is more focused on an approach that is based on how to solve complex problems. So I find that PI plannings, they are a constraint because you don't get very much flow, you have slow feedback, and the reason again is the focus on the output. So while the teams, there is nothing blocking the teams from working with pipelines, having continuous integration, continuous deployment, deploying several times per day, or creating an architecture that supports that. The problem is the 3 months planning horizon where you want to decide what the teams will work on. And there is a reason why we don't have 3 months planning iterations anymore. We usually have 1 or 2 weeks at the most, and some companies even have A/B testing in real life. And then why do you need to plan? Why have these 3 months planning cycles? So how can then SAFe be improved to better align? I think the best bet is to focus much more on the result we wish to achieve and not on what should we deliver in the next 3 months, because then we can change the mindset slightly more towards the probe, sense, respond approach. Meanwhile, a thought came up in John's head. What would happen if we wouldn't do the PI planning at all? That's all from me. Thank you so much for listening.